Oh, we're back to chapter 7. We're going to carry on with talking about array basics. In this video, we're going to carry on with trying to explain how the memory allocation works for creating an array. Now, we just talked about these three different options right here. We could declare a size, and we could do, create an instance in the stack, and we can tether it up on and create a new instance of this in the heap, and we can initialize it right here. Now we could use this method, we could use the second method, or we could even use the third method. So let's take that third method right here, and let's break it apart into two pieces. This first part, when we create an instance of an array, and this is an integer value here, we called it the names array. So that probably should have been a lowercase called number array, and it's an integer type. That gets set up again on the stack as a value, and it's going to point. It doesn't get set up as a value. It gets set up as a reference, and it puts in the reference of where this is going to be dimensioned out. As we say, is it equal to the values? Now, when this is actually going to be the second part, as we create an instance of this object up onto the memory. And you can see here that this 0x0f00 is now pointing over here. And so what we're doing here is, and this was the metaphor, the connection of the spool and the kite, where we're actually tethering this object. So if we need to reference this array in the future, we can reference it by its variable name that we declared in the stack, but the information is again stored out onto the heap, and it's dimensioned out using these different elements and then numbering them with the subscripts. And then the actual value, the actual variable, is stored in this location right here. So one of the key benefits in this is that because we were creating a series of similar elements all together, and we're connecting them with their subscripts, and the subscripts are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can start to use the looping structure to do things and load or look at or compare or do whatever we need to do with these arrays. And so what we're going to do is use a repetition structure here called the for, because we know exactly the size that it is. And because we dimensioned it out as 3, we initialized the array at 3, we can loop 3. So we're going to say for the index starting at 0, as long as it's less than the size of the array, and we're going to increment it one by one, we could go in here and we could say, let's take my value of, let's say, start off at 0, and we can stick 99, for example, in there. We could load the array. So instead of putting in, if there was like 100, for example, if this was actually 100, it would be very difficult to load that array to start off with if there was 100 of them. But this would allow us to loop through an array and load it as many times as we needed to do that. It should be noted that you cannot loop more times than the array actually is. And if you do, it's going to throw an exception, because you can't loop to something that doesn't exist. And that's really why that would throw an error, because there's nothing there. You can't keep looping if there's no element up onto the stack and you keep looping. So if I was to say, if I was to put the number 4 here, of course there's only 3 elements in the array, and if I'm looping 4 times it wouldn't work. So hence, this is the reason why. All right, now there's a property I want to mention here that comes with arrays called the length. It's basically the length of the array. So in this example here, we're setting up 25 elements into an array here called temperature. So if we wanted to actually find out how large an array is, we could look at the individual array here called temperature, and we could actually use the length property, right? So it's not a method, it's just a property. You can see it's not because there's no brackets here, so this is actually a property. And then of course we want to show it in a message box, so therefore we have to, because that length would be an integer value, you have to convert it to a string before we can send it back to the message box. And so this is it's a good property to know about in the arrays, because we tend to use how large is, or what is the length of a particular array.